This week's Torah portion, Tazria Matzora, is perhaps one of the more challenging sections of Torah for rabbis and B'nai Mitzvah students to teach about each year. It goes into very descriptive detail about the affliction of leprosy, and much of the text invokes a disturbing visceral reaction, though we are pressed to look past the troubling physical nature of the illness and find deeper meaning. In our modern world, or perhaps in a pre-COVID world, when we get sick, we visit a doctor hoping for medication and a speedy recovery. And when we are experiencing existential crises, we may speak with mental health professionals or reach out to a clergy person. During the Israelites' 40 years of walking through the desert, these roles of spiritual and physical healer were combined. In our dual Torah portion of Tazria Matzora, we learn how the ancient priest returned individuals to their clean and pure states after a period of ta'meh, of impurity. From skin afflictions to childbirth, we are given 5 occasions that would make an individual ritually and spiritually impure. And each case comes complete with a priestly treatment plan, consisting of a sin or a burnt offering, and in some instances, a period of time in quarantine. Although COVID-19 is not a skin disease, the ideas in the Torah surrounding quarantine are suddenly and uncomfortably familiar to us. Surprisingly, what is discussed in the Torah is somewhat similar to our current quarantine procedures. If someone is suspected of carrying the COVID-19 virus, they are tested and enter quarantine for 2 weeks, just as in our biblical example. And if they are confirmed to have the virus, they are further isolated. This might mean being strictly quarantined within the home, to a specific part of the home, or in severe cases, seeking medical care or even hospitalization. And upon recovery, God willing, or if they go through the initial quarantine period with no symptoms at all, they can then re-enter normal life again, or at least resume as normal of an existence as we can right now. In the biblical account, every time a person exits a period of quarantine, the transition is marked by a ritual offering. But when we end our contemporary periods of isolation, very little seems to differentiate the quarantine from the non-quarantined periods, besides from regaining some sense of freedom of movement. Although there is something to be said for following the biblical example of taking a step back and acknowledging these periods as they begin and as they conclude. It does not have to be something major. Sharing a special meal together at home, or some words of acknowledgement during a virtual meeting to welcome someone back to a place of work. The point is that it should be something that is done in community, something that is done in front of the whole group. Whether the group is a family, a classroom, a synagogue, an office, something should be done to welcome these newly unquarantined persons back into the fold. Quarantine is, by definition and intention, isolating. The protective function of quarantine is always more for the benefit of the rest of society than for the quarantined individual themselves. But it is the person in quarantine who endures the disruption to their daily lives. What often gets lost in the sometimes gory details of these Torah portions is the aftermath. No matter the disease or affliction, once healed, the person always has the opportunity to re-enter the community. But today, with the stigma of the disease in our midst, those who are fortunate enough to recover from COVID-19 may feel as if they are eternally on the outside looking in, just the same as those individuals deemed impure by our priestly ancestors. And so it is our job, as a holy community, to ensure that everyone has a way back, a way to regain strength, to re-welcome into the community. We are far from free of the grasp of this pandemic. And as we continue to take more necessary measures in Toronto and Ontario to combat the spread, let us remain hyper-vigilant to all public health safety procedures. Let us find strength in the truth and wisdom in the teaching, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. And when we are on the other side of this exhausting and frankly terrifying disease, this period of our lives which has taken hold, we will find ways to make our re-entry sweet and meaningful and holy. And until that moment, we pray for health and the strength of spirit to endure. Shabbat Shalom. As we think of freedom, the freedom that came from the Exodus from Egypt was incomplete until we received Torah at Mount Sinai. And in order to link these two events, we count the Omer, the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot. Let us rise together now and join in the blessing for counting the Omer.